taken me the longest time to actually try and put this video together, and that's because I genuinely care about what I do. Today I want to present a theory to you. Well, it's the start of an overarching theory. It's a big one, and there's a lot to it, but as always, I can count on my lovely wife for inspiration. And the inspiration she provided is to remind me that this theory really isn't just mine. It's actually our theory. You see, if you take anything out of what I'm going to present to you today, thank you, because you helped to solve it. We all did. Every single one of us. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that if you've made a comment maybe on someone else's theory, or maybe you've written on a thread on some social platform along the way, maybe one of the many Zelda sites out there, there's probably a good chance I might have read what you've had to say. It's maybe swayed me, provided me a clue as to where to go. Maybe it's actually pointed me in the direction I needed to go. Either way, I think it's fair that we all acknowledge how much we contribute together as a community, and when it comes to solving the larger mysteries, I think it's something that we've done as a collective. And this theory is our theory. And this is a big one, so I hope you're going to enjoy it. The first image that I want to present to you today is this one that comprises Sheikah plates and terminals. The glowing colour is matching the spirit green we see in the logo of Tears of the Kingdom, and prevalent in so much of the information we've seen so far, including the spirit hand and more. It comes actually from a place I didn't expect. It's the companion to the Breath of the Wild, the Complete Official Guide Expanded Edition, released in 2017. What I can say is when I found this image, it was brand new to me. I'd never seen it and I couldn't believe I missed it. But here, as far as I can see anyway, we seem to have the Sheikah tech being powered by the spirit energy, the very same that Link is carrying in those small vials on his hip in the trailer from September last year. And as a refresher, Sheikah tech is normally controlled by the ancient energy, the blue material. But in fairness, in Breath of the Wild, we also saw it controlled by Malice, and that was a key aspect of the events prior to Breath of the Wild where the calamity devastated the kingdom. Whilst you can see the general plates and understand that side of it, the one on the bottom right in particular stood out for me. It almost seems like an in-game asset, and it looks a bit like it's a place that should be familiar to me, but it's not. I can't quite place it. And I have to admit, I've shown it to a friend of mine who also had the same feeling. Either way, we were unsure, and if I'm being honest, I don't think we've seen this particular location or application. So what does it mean? Well, it could be an example of new portals or even dungeons, powered by the energy in those vials. Maybe a little bit like we see Link using his new powers in the trailer. The Japanese text on the page indicates that one of them reflects an entrance to a divine beast, while another one talks about it being a warp or an entrance point to a dungeon. I know that we've definitely seen some of the concept art come to life in Tears of the Kingdom from what we might have seen and thought was for Breath of the Wild. So it could definitely fit in that category, or it might just simply be something that was changed. The funny part about that is it relates to the larger theory I'm about to present. That's why I wanted to show you this image first, because let's move on to the bigger question at hand, because I think I can help answer why Nintendo were worried about the name Tears of the Kingdom spoiling the game. As we've been waiting in development, there's not been a lot of information for Tears of the Kingdom. In fact, the title only came itself in September last year, and it was held for reasons that Nintendo believed maybe it might spoil aspects of the game. It's been a huge point of speculation, and when I talk about this being our theory, it's probably a good source for me to talk about. I apologise if I miss any particular part or theory off of this, but I'd round it out to 4 different ideas at the moment. One is that the tears represent the Magatama-shaped objects, which are also called tears in Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess, and that's associated with the guardian spirits and the efforts sought by Link to help save Hyrule. Another one suggests the involvement of the Sheikah, and it's a really good one. It's based on the Sheikah eye symbol and the tear that's falling from it. It's very symbolic of the series, and it kind of has that foreshadowing aspect. It's really cool. I like that one. Tears also represent the sadness of people, and no doubt there's been some tragedy in Breath of the Wild. We've seen the king long gone, and with Zelda, with now the queen, I guess. The thing is we don't really know her fate, and she could be in peril. And if she is, that could mean the end of the royal lineage as a whole, potentially the end of the bloodline of the goddess Hylia. Now, I don't want to go too far down that route, and I certainly hope that's not the case, but just even the mere thought of that being something that could come into the game would be enough to cause the whole kingdom to be really concerned. And finally, another theory out there I think that's been mentioned is about how the waterfalls pouring out from the Sky Islands, well, they fall like tears on the kingdom below. And I really like that one. It's poetic, and it speaks to so much more than just a name. Personally, I like to think that it could actually represent all of them to some degree. They've all got viable aspects, and there's a lot of symbolism, and symbolism is often multifaceted. But I think, like most in the community, I haven't really felt 100% comfortable that we nailed it. There just seemed to be something missing, and it's been bugging me, and I've been thinking about it a lot. And then suddenly it hit me, and it was really silly. So I'll explain it, but it got me thinking about tears, and where do tears come from? They come from the eyes. And then it got me looking at the eyes. So this is where it gets weird. What colour eyes does Zelda have? Now, if you know the answer off the top of your head, I'm going to play a little game just quickly. If you can bear with me. What colour are they? Are you sure? Are you really, really sure? And the reason I ask this question is because if you start to wonder that question and check, I can assure you you're about to go down a rabbit hole, and it's probably fairly similar to the one that I've been on in the last few weeks. That should be a really easy question to answer. To cut a long story short, it's not. You'll probably try to look at maybe an in-game asset in Breath of the Wild, and I asked a friend, again the same friend as I mentioned earlier the other day, this very same question, and they were playing Breath of the Wild, and in the middle of a memory they said definitely blue. And I asked them if they were sure, and they checked something and came back and went, no, maybe I was wrong, maybe it's green. And this point alone is where the theory lies, funnily enough. You see, answering that question is going to be something that will vary depending on where you look. At different points in the game, it appears that her eye colour is bluer. Other times it's got more of a green tinge. I can tell you, if you head to creating a champion, one of my resources I'd use for the game, early concept art there, and especially in the section on Zelda, will be primarily a blue colour. Head towards the DLC section, it'll be green. No matter where you look, you'll start to debate the answer yourself, and hopefully you don't get to the point where I did, where you start using an RGB filter or eyedropper, which is really concerning for something that should be a straightforward answer. This actually kicked off a very long and timely investigation into a subject that should be really simple, and then became anything but. In fact, one story that I uncovered along the way is one I'd like to do on this channel, just because I thought it really spoke a lot about the people in the community, and one individual in particular, but I might leave that one for another day. Circling back to the point though, I found that in all prior games that came before Breath of the Wild, Zelda's eyes were blue. But at some point in development, a decision was made by the development team to change Zelda's eye colour to green. And if this feels like it's potentially the dumbest theory you've ever heard to date, then that's fine, I'm totally with you. But I'll try to explain why it kind of is important. You see, for people who are in love with this series, people like me, the changing of an iconic character and their eye colour is not something you do willingly or readily or quickly for no particular reason. In fact, I found in my research that for any major change of a character, especially from an artistic point of view, it goes through a whole cycle in terms of from the creation and sign off to the head art director. In fact, there's an interview about the making of Breath of the Wild where Satoru Takazawa, the art director, explains this process and particularly mentions that when it comes to the character of Link and Zelda, any sign-off on changes for those characters usually relate to a matter of functionality and will go all through both himself, Hidemaru Fujibayashi, Eiji Aonuma, and for those two in particular, that goes to Mr. Miyamoto himself as well. The mystery itself becomes even more compelling when you consider how many different images are out there showing this blue colour with the concept art. In fact, majority of the concept art shows the blue colouring and very little, like I said with the DLC, shows the green. I just couldn't seem to find any confirmation either from Nintendo about the eye colour, and maybe someone else out there will. Thank you if you do, because you're better at this than me, but it was something that just seemed really odd and I didn't quite understand why it was changed. And then I started thinking about something else and things started falling into place. You see, if Zelda's eye colour was green, it kind of made me think that she could be looking at Link, and Link representing traditionally the colour of green for courage, Link has blue eyes, and so it kind of tied in with that whole Z-Link thing, right? You know, that maybe if they had these different eye colours, it was kind of like they had eyes for each other. And, you know, it's kind of sweet. But as sweet as that sounds, it didn't really make for a good theory. I was thinking about that whole Z-Link part, and it made me think about, well, so then does the eye colour reflect desire? And so I went to look at the antagonist's eyes, and that then got a little stranger, because who's the antagonist is probably your first question. Well, let's say you look at Malice as one, Demise as another, and Ganon. Well, this becomes even more interesting. So Malice itself, well, the colour has changed over time, but we'd always have to agree that it comes back to a red hue. And red, for those uninitiated to the series, represents power. Now we're looking at the three colours, the three virtues of the Triforce. We've got red for power, green for courage, and blue for wisdom. Demise, however, has red eyes, but his pupils are a golden hue, and alternatively, if we look to Ganondorf, he generally has a yellow eye colouring with a red pupil area. And that got me thinking again about the desires, and it kind of made sense. If you think about Demise, he's always lusting for power, and really I suppose that's harnessed in the ultimate expression of that power and what he's seeking in the Triforce. And it got me thinking about Ganondorf and something that's kind of tragic and sad. It made me think that if Ganondorf was actually under Demise's curse, then maybe he's actually seeking the Triforce because he's also seeking power, but the Triforce maybe is offering him some sort of escape from that lust for power. It's kind of like he's seeking another part, like trying to fill a missing hole within himself. And I know this sounds crazy, but it suddenly made sense to me that he's kind of tragically flawed. He'll never win, right? There'll always be the princess and there'll always be the hero and he'll always be defeated. But even when he does get the Triforce, it splits because he's in imbalance and he's always lusted for power. So then it goes to its other constituents and he's left to chase them down. He's left to chase down these pieces of a Triforce that represent these virtues of courage and wisdom. Virtues he'll never have. They're just objects to him to fill this hole that's existing within him, and that will somehow make him complete. It's sad, and maybe he is cursed. We also know from Ocarina of Time that the Gerudo did have yellow eyes in that game, and that changed for Breath of the Wild. Another change, by the way, but it got me thinking as well about that whole thing where Groose is proposed to be the originator of the Gerudo tribe. Groose also had yellow eyes and red hair, and similar to Ganondorf, seemed to have a bit of an affinity to power and started the game off as a bully. But what stood out to me there is, if you would consider that likelihood, Groose with the right support and I guess with the right motivation was able to undergo a character arc that was one of redemption. It's been a discussion point in the community for Ganon. If we account for the fact that the person directing this game, Hidemaru Fujibayashi, also directed Skyward Sword and indeed Breath of the Wild, could be argued that what we saw with Groose was a foreshadowing of what could be coming for Ganondorf. Just a little side theory there for you, but look, I'll bring it back to the eye colour, and I'll add a bit more to this journey. You see, about now, I was convinced that there was something there, and I just couldn't really quite get the final piece of the puzzle. And so you can imagine my utter surprise when literally right there in front of me on the screen was none other than Hidemaro Fujibayashi himself, describing the integral nature of Zelda and her character and each individual choice, and how it must relate to that concept of her uniqueness as an individual versus the need of functionality from the design team. And at that point, an image is presented of Zelda with only two distinct changes. One is the hair, which in one picture is up and in a different design, and the other one is the eye color. And I'll let you be the judge of how significant you find that. I found it very significant. And I went further, and further I went in that video, the character of Zelda is talked about a lot. It's something I've referenced in a video I've done in the past about Zelda being the key, but here I had a whole different lens on it, where you can see the team talking about it. I mean, Satoru Takazawa actually almost seems to be giving us an Easter egg here, where he's talking about how Zelda was the hardest character by far. It was one that they'd spent so much time debating and were making changes up until the end. He talks about changing things about her gestures and even her eyelashes. Now, I don't know about you, I didn't really keep track of Zelda's eyelashes in the game, but it's almost like he's trying to draw our attention to the eyes, and he's kind of got this wry smile. This is like, it's an Easter egg. He knows he's going to be looking back on this later, and he knows he can't give it away, but he wants to. And it actually kind of ties in with what we see with Fujibayashi also making this critical point when this image shows up with what I like to call Zelda Blue and Zelda Green. And the thing about this concept art is, and trust me, as someone who goes through a lot of Zelda theory stuff, I haven't seen this in Creating a Champion or anywhere else. But then I did find it in Creating a Champion, and frustratingly, it was actually on the same collage page for Zelda where a lot of the other imagery of different Zeldas existed. Unfortunately, on this page, of course, everything's got a yellow hue, so the eye color is absolutely meaningless. Quirky side fact though, it's the same page where the image of Hylia that I sort of overlaid in the video about the mural we see for Tears of the Kingdom was found. So yeah, quite a significant little page, that one. So I'll sort of bring this round because, to be honest, there's actually a lot more to this series that I want to cover eventually, but let's just get to the crux of the matter. So here we have definitely an association between the eye color and the Triforce, and we've got evidence of it being changed midway through development. And more so than that, we've got an understanding of the significance of it from the development team, and it makes you understand that that relevance could be related to functionality. And so from here, you could start to make a few different assumptions about what this means. One assumption could be that it's significant to the relevance of the Triforce, and you wouldn't have to convince me on that matter. I've been saying that I believe the Triforce is going to come into play in. I'm almost 100% convinced that's the case, and in fact, I've actually proposed a sort of idea in the past where if we were to look at the timeline split, and it was one we discussed in the Unity theory with other commenters who'd provided their input, that if each of the timelines represented an aspect of the Triforce, a virtue if you will, that we could be seeing a reunification of that. In the tunic that we see Link wear, I pointed out that it looked to be like a culmination of three different sets of Triforces. Non-force? I don't know what the term is, but look, I actually think that could be the case. You know, there's two timelines. We see the Triforce reunited at the end, and one where it's still split. And Zelda could be holding one of those Triforces on her hand when she uses her powers. If you think back in the series, normally when the Triforce is reunited, it's a physical object that kind of exists outside of the person, not on their hand. But when it's on their hand, it's usually because the Triforce has been split. Yet, we see with Zelda what appears to be a Triforce in full on her hand. So, let's just say that my, headcanon with that one is that, if Zelda's got a full Triforce there, then it would also kind of help make sense as to why the Malice is just going absolutely crazy there, because maybe there's a full Triforce in play in the Ganondorf character we see under the ground. And that could help explain what we might be doing with Link heading to the Sky Islands. to get the competing Triforce, and they would all represent Triforce incomplete of their virtue. So that could be the one of courage, perhaps. But that's the thing, right? Is Link going for Triforce of courage? Because the other argument at this point might be whether they're actually representing the same place on the Triforce. This one's a little bit left field, but hear me out. What if Zelda in Breath of the Wild, and what we now know in this timeline, is actually representing courage? It kind of makes sense in the fact that if you look at her story arc, she starts the game as quite a quiet, submissive, almost defeated person who's stuck in her role and her duty and almost a victim to a situation to the point she's nearly the victim of an assassination attempt. But by the end of the game, with everyone in turmoil and the whole Hyrule, environment just devastated, she walks up wholly and solely, no armor, no sword, no shield, to take on the biggest bad that you've ever seen on her own and hold it at bay for 100 years. That's courage right there. And Link, he has to learn what's happened in the past. He has to apply that and try to do better than he's done. He has to learn wisdom. And finally, we've got the champion's garb, the blue. That's an iconic thing for Link to normally wear the green, but in this game, he's presented with the blue colour. You could definitely argue it to be another foreshadowing of this particular change. Hopefully now you got a good idea of why I'm saying that I think I might be onto something significant. Because in and of itself, an eye colour change might not be important, but with this iconic character, it certainly is. It's something that seemed to happen but wasn't discussed. It was also something that seemed to happen late in concept, probably about the time that they knew they were going to definitely be making Tears of the Kingdom and not just Breath of the Wild. There's a certain mystery that exists around Breath of the Wild and how it seems to combine elements of the different timelines and, meld them in a way of creating a world that's unique and has this air of mystery about how it's come to be. And a lot of the unique features that comprise those different aspects almost seem to come together in what we see with this difference in the eye colour, and if those characters represent those virtues of the Triforce in terms of who they are. It definitely signals a return of that Triforce. And I'll go one step further and maybe consider this my foreshadowing of the next theory, is one that I want to talk about in depth, which is, for me, if we're talking about the return of the Triforce, we're also talking about how that relates to its key progenitors, and that's the concept of Hylia, demise, and time. You see, what that theory will propose is how Hylia's plans and the duality that she put in place, being very much focused around what was going to happen in events thousands of years in the making and involving individuals and their particular choices. You could argue that Hylia had demonstrated the skills of foresight that she had planned and prophesized, not unlike the Sheikah, and the Sheikah of course being seen in the mural of the joining of what I believe might be Hylia there. I think there's something significant in that. I believe that Hylia actually is able to see through time and ahead of time. She controls time in a way and manipulates it through the goddess harp and the ocarina of time. She even travels through and was responsible for the building of the gates of time as well. But then with Demise you have this character who is described in-game as being a conqueror of time. And that almost implies that he can't be defeated. And I'll relate this whole story to Japanese mythology as well. The sun goddess Amaterasu, the imperial regalia, and indeed the character of Mikaboshi. But to cut a long story short, I actually would argue that how do you beat a being who's conquered time? You can't. He'll come back. And so the story there is that Demise may have actually put in place a triple play to handle Hylia's double play, that maybe he anticipated his defeat. And in a move that's so indicative of the character that we're talking about, he expected this defeat to occur. He wanted it to occur. He wished it, because it would allow him to have this hatred and this anger and this malice build. And it was actually foreseen in what we saw in Skyward Sword and the Ancient Cistern, that was the beginnings of his malice, but that malice could only exist if he was defeated at the end of the game. and was able to supply the curse on Link and Zelda. And so that malice would feed and that hatred grow and writhe and seethe and grow over time, and it would bring his demon horde back to life. And even if they chose death, it wouldn't matter, because they would be brought back to life even against their will.
The blood moon rises once again. Please be careful.
And against their will, brought back to life, their hatred would actually build as well, and that would feed the malice. And so his army of undead would just continue to grow and grow larger and larger. And I say he reflects Mikaboshi, and Mikaboshi is known as the Dread Star. And so eventually this hatred and malice would rise to try and meet its source, the very source in the stars. The observatories had been looking for that, and eventually it would be in the form of the blood moon that malice would meet its maker to bring the dead back to life. And I think we see that in this mural for Tears of the Kingdom, this war over time of malice consuming everything. And I think Tears of the Kingdom is going to actually address potentially the biggest war of them all, the war for time. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed today's video. There's a lot more material supporting behind it. If you've got questions, reach out and let me know, but it was never going to be finished if I tried to do it a different way. I hope you appreciate, just how much all of you mean in terms of the input that you make and what difference that has for other people in the community as well. We're all just fans. So let's enjoy this ride together. Guys, we've got a new game coming, Tears of the Kingdom. I'm on board, and I know you are too. Let's enjoy it, huh? Alright, as always, you guys keep being amazing. My name's Jeremy, and you know me as GameSmiths. I'll see you next time.